Hey, this week, Canonical is falling for Google's Flutter. AMD is adding stuff to FFmpeg. We get a history lesson on where the name Linux came from, and pigs continue to fly, with Nvidia starting to recommend the open source kernel driver. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust. This is TWiT.
This is the Untitled Linux Show, episode 151, recorded May 11th. Smarter Dumb Terminal. Hey everybody, it is time for the Untitled Linux Show. It's Saturday, you know what that means. It is time to get geeky. Of course, it is not just me. We've got the whole gang here, and we are starting to embrace sort of this idea of a rotating panel of co-hosts, or at least that's what we're going to tell ourselves. We've got David, Rob, and Jeff. And we've got some fun stories this week. We've got some pigs fly sort of stories this week, which are going to be fun to get to. First off, we're going to go to Rob, who is going to tell us about the sordid love affair between Canonical and Google. At least that's what it sounds like.
Well, let's talk about Flutter, Google, and Canonical. For those following technology, a lot of this information will be old news, but it will be required knowledge to tie this all together. First, Flutter. Flutter is a user interface development kit created by Google, used to develop cross-platform apps from a single code base on about any modern platform, from web to Windows, Linux, Mac OS, Android, iOS, Fuchsia. And I don't know if I've missed anything. And Google released Flutter in May of 2017. So then in a few years after that, in July of 2020, Canonical announced support for Flutter in Ubuntu, and one of the first, maybe still, I mean, definitely was the first, I think, Linux distribution to announce this. And have been going all in, moving their applications to Flutter. Today, the new Ubuntu's installer firmware updater. Okay, hold on a second. My Google Home is talking to me and it's driving me nuts. Okay, it stopped. I don't know if anyone could hear that. I'm like, what is going on? But anyway, today, the new Ubuntu's installer, firmware updater, App Center, and the Desktop Security Center are all built on Flutter. Now, in all this, there is Google. And I think most TWiT listeners are likely familiar with the Killed by Google website, because Google has a bad habit of backing something and then killing it off. So who in their right mind is going to build their business on systems that they require Google technologies? Not me. I've lost my trust a long time ago. So one concern brought up this week to OMG Ubuntu from community devs is that the Flutter 2024 roadmap has deprioritized desktop features. Along with that, Google has laid off about 200 people across many of its core development teams, including Python, Dart, and Flutter. So it is beginning to look like the beginning of the end for Flutter, maybe, or maybe just Flutter on the desktop. Maybe, but maybe it's not quite as it seems. A lot of these roles, they were reassigned to Google employees in other countries, including India, Mexico, and Germany. And a project manager on the Google Dart Flutter team says the layoffs are fairly equal across the board for the company. It's not just affecting their area. So, maybe it's not a targeted get out of here, Flutter. And he says they're still working on these initiatives, putting a lot of work into them. And things like GTK4 are still on the Flutter roadmap. So, the desktop is still in the works, but to me, it just seems pretty clear that Google's priorities is more on the web and mobile applications, which makes sense. They are a web and mobile company with, Google, Gmail, and Android. So although Canonical isn't going to be hurt by this yet, this should Canonical really be throwing so many eggs into a Google basket? I've had way too many Google products go away for me to ever put any real trust in a Google product again. Maybe I'll use it, but I'm not going to throw everything in there and expect it to be there next year.
So I think there is an important difference here. If your Google product that depends upon Google servers, if Google pulls the plug on it, there's not a whole lot that you can do. If Google says we're not going to develop Flutter anymore, there would be nothing that would keep Canonical from continuing to update their own fork of Flutter just for their installer if they wanted to. You get a bit of that open source insurance because it's an open source project.
It's better than nothing, but I don't know. I just don't want to.
If they continue to develop for the desktop, I do worry a little bit when they say, well, we just relocated the jobs to other places, because you have that experience that you have the developers working on this. And then even if their developers are even more capable in these other countries, you still have all that learning curve and time to get up to speed and how does everything work. And so even if it doesn't kill it, it's probably at least going to set it back a ways while they learn the project and the interactions and how the whole thing works.
Maybe that's why the roadmap.
It also kind of indicates that you've got the bean counters making decisions about the way the source or the way the project is developed, which there's another big U.S. company that has found out that maybe that's not a great idea. They make airplanes that have a tendency to fall out of the sky. So yeah, something to be said for that.
We could even take a step back and look at Intel and Microsoft when they had bean counters running the business, and both businesses got hurt because you didn't have somebody in technology running and making the decisions for technological companies.
Yeah.
Well, I am a Flutter developer now, so I have a dog in the fight.
Yeah.
And I actually read that story and considered it myself, amongst several others that Rob stole from me this week, but I'm not sore at all. But I think it is there's always some concern when you see a company starting to pull back, but Dart and Flutter has always been a community resource. So I actually think long-term it's better for the ecosystem, because it's going to prompt other larger companies that have the resources to start investing more into the ecosystem. Microsoft has a big Flutter presence. JetBrains is another one out there that I'm aware of, and I am a Flutter developer, but not an extensive one, so I'm still getting my head around the whole ecosystem. But for that side of it, with it being completely open source, it's not a service that depends on Google in any way. So I think long term it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, so Google could step off right now and say, all right, we can't afford it. We're going to cut all of our devs off of working on Flutter. And while it would be chaos for a little while, I kind of feel like the project would continue at a slower pace. Maybe some changes would have to happen, but it seems like Flutter has enough critical mass outside of Google that it would continue on even if Google stepped away from it.
Yeah, it is fortunate that it is open source at least.
Yeah. One thing we should go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was gonna say the thing that gets me is, well, we're saving costs. How much money did Google make last year, and how much are they currently making?
Yeah, I think part of that though is that the numbers at Google are so big that if things go down, they could go down in a hurry. And it seems like they kind of have that in mind, too. One thing that we should make clear is the relationship between Flutter and Dart and where Dart is with all of this. So Flutter is the framework where you can write code once and run it on basically any platform, whereas Dart is the programming language itself. And I think Google has a lot... they have a lot to do with the Dart programming language, too, if I understand correctly. It's kind of their next big thing to replace Java, or one of their next big things to replace Java on Android, right? Anybody that knows?
Sure.
Okay.
We might have a comment from the listener community at some point.
Yeah, we may. I know people to ask. I just don't have them on necessarily in front of me right now.
I think they're part of what they're using on Fuchsia. I'm not so sure if it's Android or not, but makes sense that it would be.
Oh,
I mean,
no,
it is on Android. But
yes, you can run Dart stuff and Flutter on Android, of course.
just whether or not it's their next big thing.
Yeah, because they've also got Kotlin, which is kind of a Java replacement for Android. So I don't know. And that's one of the weird deals about Google is that they'll have like 2 or 3 different things, different projects doing the same thing. It's just sort of their style. They kind of throw stuff up against the wall and see what sticks. And the stuff that doesn't stick, they try to toss out pretty quick.
The problem is, though, that when they toss several things against the wall and then decide all of them aren't sticking at the same time and just drop the ecosystem. That's scary.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, when you have 5 things out there and all of them only have 20% of the market, they must not be working right.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on. We're going to come back to sort of the same idea when we get to David's story because it very much ties in, but we want to let Jeff go next and talk about some AMD news.
Yeah, so last week, AMD released some patches to improve the integration of the Advanced Media Framework, AMF, with FFmpeg. AMF provides programmers with access to AMD GPUs for multimedia processing, enabling tasks such as encoding, decoding to be performed on the GPU rather than the CPU. So this not only offloads tasks from the CPU, but it also enhances performance as GPUs are specifically designed for multimedia processing. So while AMF has capabilities beyond just encoding and decoding, its primary benefit lies in aiding multimedia applications. In essence, AMD's patches were aimed at optimizing FFmpeg's performance with AMD GPUs. The patches in question for AMF have added some hardware context in various decoders such as H.264, HEVC, and AV1. And additionally, they've introduced smart access video functionality for AMF encoders. Another feature enables the parallelization of encode and decode streams across multiple hardware instances and virtual cloud networks. Dmitry Obchinovsky explained that the patches, and while I won't read his notes because it says what we went over with a few more technical details, it basically can be summarized as a good performance improvement for AMD GPUs. All is well and good, right? Well, here's where things start to derail a little bit. FFmpeg developer Lin, who is known for doing a lot of development in the Vulkan video enablement, basically asked in his reply, which I'm paraphrasing, why were they, AMD, still working on AMF as it's hardly used, and the more open Vulkan video ecosystem will give them, or soon give them, what they want. Lin does go on to say that the AMF is not used a lot in Linux, and in the Linux world and even in the Windows world, D3D12 seems to be gaining traction. Dmitry responded that DX12 and Vulkan native encoders will expose fewer features compared to AMF, and at least in the foreseeable future. He then proceeded to list features that are either not up to par or missing from the current Vulkan library. Dmitry provided several examples, such as pre-analysis, including look-ahead, and mentioned that eventually specialized multimedia AMD cards could be seamlessly integrated with FFmpeg through AMF. Do take a look at the link in the show notes for all the different examples he provides. I'm kind of simplifying this a little bit, but they get into the details a little more. Well, here's where it now gets a little more spicy. Lin still questions if the set of patches should be included in FFmpeg and replied to Dmitry with, and this is a direct quote, "Do you really not talk to each other over there?" Meaning AMD. "You should. This is a lot of vendor-specific code for which an overlap with the standard API already exists, and I just prefer to know why this should be merged and maintained now, as Vulkan video adoption is finally starting. So that was the end of the quote. And so far, the patches are not included. And checking the thread that this was going on in, I don't see any replies to Lynn as of Saturday morning, May the 11th. So we'll have to see where this goes and see what happens with the patches. But it's kind of an interesting, spicy discussion going on. And I did want to kind of fill in here a bit that AMF is only in the AMD proprietary driver, so it's only sort of open source-ish.
That is an important missing bit there. I did not realize that.
Yeah.
That makes it less interesting for the thing, because I'm sitting here listening to this going, oh, wow, over in ZoneMinder, we have been looking at, moving to FFmpeg for video decoding, and this could really help. And if it's the proprietary drivers only, well, that's kind of a sad trombone. Sad trumpet.
Yeah, it's kind of in a gray open source area where it's the proprietary drivers are sort of open source ish, but it's not available on the true open source driver. So that's why they're trying to push the Vulkan extensions. And
interesting. Yeah, I can imagine. I very much resonate with this idea that the problem with using the Vulkan and DX12 is that they're so gaming focused, and there are other use cases out there. Like, for example, the one that we're looking at is decoding, H.264 and H.265 streams from security cameras, and there is a big difference between decoding a single stream or encoding a single stream for gaming. And hey, we have 120 cameras and we need to decode all of them, but they're all running at like 1 FPS. Like, those are wildly different use cases. So I could see the argument that you might need a different code path for that.
well, looking at the comments, I mean, there's some of it saying, well, the Vulkan extension hasn't really taken off or not enough, but they're also saying, well, AMD could help develop it to get the features they need, and it's already planned to get the features that they're proposing in AMF. So it's a little back and forth, and a lot of comments were kind of all over the place. And I don't know, I think unless you're kind of really involved, it's kind of hard to say whether the Vulkan extensions are gonna take over and supplant the proprietary code or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that's a good actual segue into another story that I've got, continuing on the video graphics driver discussion. So Nvidia has announced that starting with their next series of GPUs, the 560 series, which that's going to be, I think, like Turing / RTX 20 and later. They are going to go to the open source kernel modules wherever possible, moving away from their closed source kernel modules altogether, which is really interesting. There are a couple of things to kind of note here. One, these are actually still out of tree. We are not talking about anything that is in the mainline kernel, although I can foresee a future where maybe they do land in mainline. Obviously, NVIDIA seems to be slowly moving towards that. But it's going to be, it'll make things easier. It'll make installation easier. It's going to make maintenance easier. I think it is a huge win that they are going to officially support running with these open source kernel modules. Now, there's still going to be in user space, there's like the other half of the driver is still going to potentially be proprietary for now, at least. But things are moving in an open source direction for NVIDIA, and it's pretty incredible to see. So yeah, next series of video cards from NVIDIA, be able to run an untainted kernel. It's cool.
And then Rob's on mute.
Rob is muted.
While he's figuring the button out, I'll say, theoretically, the next 5090 is supposed to be released here very shortly, so we could see this quickly.
No.
I was just going to say maybe one of these years I'll be able to go back to Nvidia, but
Might be soon. Maybe some actual competition for video cards for those of us that are unwilling to run a proprietary driver.
well, I'm not due for an upgrade yet, so
So you're not going to splurge on a 5090?
I already splurged when the cards were right at the end of being expensive.
Don't want to think about how much the 5090 is going to cost when it first comes out.
The next time you splurge, you need to go to Apple hardware anyway. Start running. But that's
right.
out of sequence story, so never mind.
That is on my list, though. I know what you're talking about, and that is on my list of things to splurge on.
Yeah.
Side note, I'm kind of concerned that Intel, they're kind of, sounds like they might be backing out of the video card market a little bit. AMD might be kind of backing out a little bit. Nvidia's focusing a lot on AI and enterprise. I mean, I don't know if there's going to be a lot of consumer level competition here in a couple years. I hope it's wrong, and I hope there is, but
Yeah. You think that's maybe because so much effort is going towards AI right now?
yeah, I think, well, I know for a fact, and this is just, not insider news, it's just keeping an ear to the ground, that Intel and AMD are both working really hard to try to catch up and be competitors to Nvidia, because Nvidia's just selling everything they can make for ridiculous prices.
Another story on priorities again.
I suppose.
The only benefit is that a lot of the technology for the AI and things that they're doing pretty easily trickles down to GPUs. So
Yeah, but if there's not, if there's so much demand around AI hardware, then that's going to make it. It's going to cut down on the supply potentially for consumer hardware.
unless they say, well, okay, we'll sell consumers the chips that didn't quite make it, and we'll still play games really well, but maybe it doesn't have quite the memory bandwidth, or certain cores aren't working quite like how they should, but they're not used in gaming, so nobody would ever notice anyway.
Yeah,
Because while those Venn diagrams overlap, they're not perfectly overlapped.
I got to call out Keith S512, who says, I've not had any issues with Nvidia drivers, but that's because I use X11. Stop blaming Nvidia and instead blame Wayland. And Keith, all I have to say, out, get out of here. No.
All right. My personal experience when I completely dumped Nvidia on my desktop, actually not this desktop. Yeah, actually it is this desktop, but is when I installed Arch and I did a Pacman -S Nvidia that's supposed to just install the Nvidia drivers, pick the right ones for you, or whatever it does, I don't know. But and then I rebooted and it wouldn't load up, so I had to boot into installation media, chroot over to it, and remove those again. And eventually I figured out I had to load the DKMS, and I didn't know what I was doing. So the way I figured that out is I installed Endeavor OS, and they installed the DKMS. I looked at what they did, and then I just went back to Arch, and then I installed the DKMS drivers instead of doing the Pacman.
So that's
and I didn't want to mess with
Arch
that
problem.
It's a lot of
I didn't
work.
want to mess with that garbage.
It's a lot of work
Yeah,
when you could just run AMD and install Fedora and everything works right out of the box.
Yeah. And
Hey,
I will.
once
I will. s-
Once I pulled out that NVIDIA card, I had it working with the DKMS, but I didn't want to have to mess with that stuff anymore. You shouldn't have to. I ordered an AMD card. I pulled out the NVIDIA card, plugged in the AMD card, did nothing, just worked.
Sounds like you need to run Ubuntu or Fedora. Both of them worked perfect out of the box for me. And Keith 512, I will kind of rebuke your comment a little bit. You need to use KDE 6 or 6.1. It works good in there. I have used it,
It's true.
and it works.
with NVIDIA?
Yeah.
It has actually come to the point to where Nvidia, so long as you don't have one, there's a narrow slot in time where the Nvidia video cards just don't work. But anything beyond that or before that, things in the kernel and things in KDE, everything has come along, and things in Nvidia land, for that matter, have come along to where things are back to pretty much just working.
I may try it again then, because what I ran into is I've got Nvidia on laptops using the Optimus hybrid integrated GPU and dedicated Nvidia GPU, and that's what never worked right.
Yeah, it
Makes sense.
now if you're on, GNOME works good, and KDE 5 series if you're on X11, and Wayland for GNOME and KDE 6. I do not have experience or recent experience with XFCE Keith 512, so I can neither confirm nor deny the performance there.
One thing, I don't think XFCE supports Wayland yet, so it's all X11. But
yeah.
The other thing I think I recall, now this was 2 years ago about 2-ish years ago when I dumped my NVIDIA card and put in the AMD. I think I recall my Steam games actually working better. Games that I had to tinker with and do things to get working just worked without the extra flags and that. And I could be completely wrong. That's how I remember it.
It makes sense to me. Sounds right.
You remember it any way you want, Rob.
All right, let's go to David, and he's got a really important thought here, and it ties into what we've been talking about all show pretty much. So David, take it away and tell us about the Crossroads.
So I've got an article here linked in the show notes from the New Stack, and the title is Open Sources at a Crossroads. But what it boils down to is they pull out a lot of different things that we've actually mentioned on the show in the past. Some of the changes as an ecosystem that we're seeing in open source, not just Linux, but all the things that are built on Linux. And what it boils down to is they use the term crossroads. They also use the term midlife crisis somewhere in here, but I think it's more an issue of growing up. And the reason why I say that is because if you think about growing up, you go through late teens, early 20s, you're kind of transitioning out of high school, college, even if you're geeky and everything, you've been doing a lot of research and just had the flexibility to explore your passions and everything. And then you get into the quote real world and you discover you have to pay for your housing, your food. You have to make money. And that's the challenge and the tension that we're seeing in the open source community. And because, we talk about license changing, we're talking about things becoming more closed source, more restrictive. But the bottom line is that most of those decisions are being driven by some arbitrary and some real financial concerns. You've got people who are maintaining, core fundamental frameworks, applications, open source code that have to be able to provide for themselves and their families, provide for their future. And we have a lot of large companies. I mean, it's easy to pick on the large companies, but kind of like our stories before, who are driven by shareholders a lot of times, fiduciary responsibilities to try to make the biggest profit possible. And so that means that oftentimes that they take advantage of the open source community. Many commit back by hiring developers and contributing back, but there are a lot that don't. And so you have certain core technologies. We've seen ones they pull out specifically as far as licensing changing around that recently is Terraform, Redis, Elasticsearch, Linkerd. And then there's been some, that have transitioned fairly well. But basically, the tension is we've always kind of operated on a quote donation jar scenario, and trying to transition that into something that supports us long term as an open source community, while still respecting and embracing the very nature and fundamentals of open source. So I don't know that we have any answers, but it will continue to be a tension and a struggle.
Yeah. This is one of the things we talk about on Floss Weekly a lot, because we have businesses on and ask them, essentially, how are you paying the bills doing open source? I do have some thoughts on that. We've seen models that work. One of the ones that actually works really well is basically the business that is kind of doing the work of an open source project. If they get sponsored to add features, that is something that works really well. And then, also essentially selling time for consulting about it. Help people get set up with this open source thing. But that doesn't work for every project, right? That neither of those make a whole lot of sense for the back-end library that nobody sees, that maybe doesn't need any new features. It just needs the security updates to continue to flow if somebody finds something. I like what companies like TideLift are trying to do. So TideLift, and there's another couple that are like that, are attempting to fix exactly this problem, where they will do an audit. They'll go to a business and do an audit of all of the different libraries. And I think TideLift is explicitly, or at least it used to be, just JavaScript libraries. It was like just Node.js. But they would do an audit, and then they'd say, okay, I don't remember if they would make a recommendation or if it was just whatever the business wanted to. But anyway, the business would pay TideLift X number of dollars a month for essentially a support contract for their open source libraries. And TideLift would then distribute that money to the libraries that were doing stuff. And that's a neat idea. You'd mentioned businesses, kind of an implication that businesses are using open source because they want things for free. Sometimes that is the case. I have also heard stories, though, of businesses wanting to support open source, but contacting the project and saying, okay, we need you to invoice us. For us to be able to pay you this money, we need you to generate an invoice. And it's like there was nobody at the open source project that was capable of doing that, because like there was no business infrastructure there. Nobody had an LLC, and there wasn't a parent organization. There wasn't anything to generate the invoice. So I think it's probably a fair analogy when you make this comment about open source growing up, and suddenly there's all these new things that you have to learn about and deal with. That's probably pretty accurate. There are some of these questions that we just don't have answers to yet. Like, how do you keep the developers of NTP developing and making money when most people don't ever think about the network time protocol as being something that somebody needs to continue working on? That's a challenge. I think there is room for businesses to step up. But we'll see. We will see. I think probably the way this will work, and I hate to say this, but probably the way this will work is there will be so many, as time goes on, there will continue to be security problems, and businesses will get bit by it continually. They get to the point to where they are forced to support open source development as a form of essentially insurance. All right, we'll see.
Definitely food for thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say even if the open source doesn't have an LLC or anything like that, a lot of times the corporate software to even bill a company can be rather complex. So you're not just sending them a bill. There's certain portals you have to go through and certain programs you have to use, and like you're using things like SAP, and so it's even more than just having a license. You have to be able to navigate the business software.
Which can be a challenge.
On the open source side, as a small developer myself, I could see where, some business said, hey, I want to give you money, but I need you to invoice me. I'm like, okay, well, now we're establishing a business relationship, and there may be some unwritten or unknown responsibilities that I incur by accepting that.
Yeah, that's true.
You have to start filing your quarterly estimated taxes and all the things that business.
Well, I was thinking more in like them coming back and saying, "Hey, this security issue we discovered, you're responsible for because we paid you." And
yeah, some liability issues. There is a model that some businesses use that it kind of irked me when I first discovered it, but as I get more and more into things, I'm beginning to see the virtues of it. And it's places like I think RHEL is one that does it, where they'll have an offering. And so I think with RHEL, they've got a free version and they've got a corporate version. Everything is open source, including their corporate version, but it's just not publicly available. So like you pay for it and you get the code and you get the binaries and the installer and it's all GPL, but you still pay to get the updated releases.
Like Red Hat.
Well, yes, like Red Hat. So that's the thing. Nobody cares that Red Hat charges you money. That's not the problem. The problem is at Red Hat, they have the license agreement that puts extra onus on the GPL, which that's the kind of a whole other discussion and argument who's right and who's wrong there and whether anybody is right or wrong about that. But yeah, no, I do not hate that business model at all. I have problems with, like I said, the license agreement that adds things to the GPL. But as far as a business model, especially for some businesses, that really makes sense. It does put you into a place where there is some liability. If you're selling a product, there's some liability for that product. And so that's different than, just a hobbyist writing some code in their spare time. But I don't know. I don't think the hobbyist expects to make any money from it.
Yeah,
True.
so it's that whole process of, when the hobbyist becomes the key linchpin of the internet itself, how do we keep everybody alive and functioning?
Yes. Yeah. Like I said, there's been a couple of companies that are out there specifically thinking about that, like TideLift. But it really, I don't know. It seems like there needs to be somebody thinking about it.
Here's the business idea.
Yeah.
A company, a security-minded company, I guess, that businesses subscribe to.
Mm-hmm.
And then these businesses kind of work with the top open source things and keep them all up to date, share their wealth and provide.
I mean, that's essentially what TideLift is trying to be. And there's some other companies doing that.
I thought he was describing the Linux Foundation.
Well, yeah, that too.
Well, do they also
trying to-
provide paid programmers too to assist with it?
I mean, the Linux Foundation pays Torvald's salary. There's nothing else.
Well, I guess you do that.
They do pay developers.
Yeah. So Trent says there needs to be government or business investment in open source. I am sort of ideologically opposed to the government coming in to try to fix much of anything. Because as Ronald Reagan said, the scariest words in the English language are "we're from the government and we're here to help." I don't know. Is that getting political? We better not get political. We don't get political on this show.
Well,
I bet we have another story.
You don't necessarily have to agree with his political positions to agree with that sentiment.
I think so. All right, let's move on to the next story before we get ourselves in trouble. And lovely. It's more about Red Hat and about AI. Filling the bingo card out here.
Two of our favorite things.
Yeah. Take it away, Rob.
Favorite things. So, just like every other conference I've been to in the past year, the Red Hat 2024 Summit that took place in December this past week had to throw AI into the mix. This wasn't one of the conferences I went to, but I read about it. Anytime I hear that a company is going to have a big announcement at a conference, my automatic response lately has been, it's AI, isn't it? I bet it's AI. And in all honesty, actually, I was at a conference just a couple weeks ago, and I was actually wrong about their big announcement. There wasn't AI at all, but they did talk about AI. Anyway, getting a little bit off topic. On May 7th, Red Hat announced the developer preview of Red Hat Enterprise Linux AI, or RHEL AI for short. A foundation model platform that enables users to more seamlessly develop, test, and deploy generative AI models. RHEL AI is based on the Instruct Lab open source project and combines open source licensed Granite large language models from IBM Research and Instruct Lab model alignment tools based on the lab, or large scale alignment for chatbots methodology, in an optimized bootable RHEL image to simplify server deployments. So at general availability, Red Hat Enterprise Linux AI subscriptions will include enterprise support, a complete product lifecycle, starting with the Granite 7B model and software, and IP indemnification by Red Hat. But today, you can still install the developer preview for free by following info on the project's GitHub page. But the developer preview does not come with any support besides community support. So you can do that today. I believe I put the GitHub link in the show notes. If I didn't, I will add that. And that could have been another distro hopper's corner, but I'm not ready to test RHEL AI's dev preview quite yet. But you go ahead and do it. It could be fun.
Yeah.
So if you
not.
dig into some of those specs, though, they recommend 320 gig of RAM with 4 Nvidia H100 GPUs for their initial testing. It's
just recommended,
though.
Yeah, I would recommend buy more RAM. Just buy all the RAM you can, and big SSDs to go with it.
Preferably Micron brand on all those chips, right?
Well, if you want to do it right,
I think Red Hat probably is working with those hardware companies just to try to sell more hardware, just like Windows or Microsoft did with their Windows 11.
So I dug into that press release a little bit because it was quite interesting to me. And their cycle, or their proposed process, is you can actually install the Instruct Lab CLI on a laptop or desktop. So it's pretty lightweight LLM, and you start with it to kind of get your model. They call it a low fidelity model, and your skills and knowledge added, and then you go from that to the Red Hat Enterprise Linux AI software running on some pretty significant hardware, but that's what they're releasing right now. And then once you get that and you have your first production run, then you're going to want to take that and go even larger by going into a cloud service of some sort. So it's, pretty much everybody on TWiT Network, when they talk about AI, they talk about how huge these models are, but this is putting some real numbers behind it. So I found that pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'm curious, somebody that knows this better than I do. One of the things what does it mean? What is IP indemnification by Red Hat? What is that a reference to? Does anybody know?
It means that when your AI model goes and consumes all the resources on the internet and somebody comes after you for intellectual property, that Red Hat's saying, oh no, it's cool because, we indemnified you. Now, I don't know any more than that. So I can't get into all the lawyer side of it, but that's what the indemnification is about.
So if you get in trouble from AI copyright stuff, Red Hat's in your corner. For what that means.
Yes. So if SCO decides to resurrect itself around AI, there's a throwback for you.
Wow, man. Wow. Have I told you guys the story about the time I had to support a SCO Unix install? That was fun. I had to virtualize a SCO Unix install.
Oh, well, if it was Go Unix, that had to have been from before they became evil, at least, because they turned to evil when they had no software.
Yeah, no, this was an actual SCO install in somebody's office. Yeah, anyway, let's talk about Steam. Let's get away from this boring business stuff and talk gaming. Jeff, what is up with those of us that want to run Steam on our big 4K TVs?
Okay, well, I've got good news for you. And I try to bring a lot of good news. And this week brings more Steam goodness in the form of a Steam client update. So as Jonathan, mentioned, there's some goodies for those 4K people. And one of the things is this latest Steam client modifies the default scale factor from 200% to 150% on 4K monitors. It also removes incompatibility options from an application's compatibility settings and enhances the startup speed in flat pack environments. Moreover, it addresses several issues leading to Steam web helper crashes, slow boot up on heavily loaded systems, a glitch that caused the Store tab to show no content after maximizing the Steam client window, a problem where the Steam client window might freeze until resized, and a situation where Steam would try to run the Windows version of a game without utilizing Steam Play compatibility on Linux.
Whoops.
Which means, that whole sentence means it wouldn't use Proton to run the game. So, i.e. it would crash.
Yeah.
Now, this isn't for Linux users yet, but I thought it was worth noting. But Remote Play has been beefed up by adding support for full HDR to HDR streaming when streaming from a Windows PC using Nvidia or AMD hardware acceleration to another's Windows PC or Mac with an HDR display. So since they've done it for Windows users, I think it won't be too long before we can also see it for Linux. And I just wanted to take note of this so we can keep an eye out for this in the future. And, I know Jonathan's going to be excited for HDR. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that's a short transition before we see it on the Linux side as well. Steam Input got some love with a new configuration, swapped left with right, which lets you change the behavior of the left and right stick or left and right trackpad when using a controller. It also receives 3 new mouse actions: reset to horizon, turn camera 360, and turn to face direction. Though this release encompasses numerous other enhancements, by referring to the article mentioned in the show notes, you can find a detailed link that elaborates on the updates made. Within the article, there's also a link leading to the release notes from Valve, where each individual modification is documented. You should get the release automatically, but if you want to have it and make sure you have it, you can go out and check for an update. You open Steam, look in the upper left corner where the Steam menu item is located, and when you click on it, a drop-down menu will appear with the option of check for Steam client updates. The program will go out and look, and at the bottom it will tell you if you're up to date or if you want to download and install the update if you need it. So it'll be easy to do, and overall I just love gaming on Linux. It's my happy place.
Yeah. I am surprised, actually, that the HDR streaming does not already work, considering that the HDR Steam Deck is out there. It seems like that would have been a day one feature that they would have wanted to have.
Yeah, I thought of that too, but I think it's probably a first step. But if they make it work on the Windows with the HDR Steam Deck, I think it's going to be probably a short time before we see it.
Yeah, I would think so. Now, the HDR Steam Deck, obviously, it runs HDR games if you're running them locally, which is really kind of what they are trying to do with the Steam Deck. I think it's more intended to be a local play rather than a remote play this way. But
true,
there's some potential for this.
Yeah, because they've got HDR already working on a Linux operating system.
Yep.
So it's not like they have to do a lot of heavy lifting to make HDR work over a remote play.
Yeah.
I don't think, because they can already display it. And
yeah, it should be you would think, a pretty easy bridge to cross. It's actually a fairly decent place to plug in the latest update to HDR and color management in KWin. This is part 3 from Xaver's blog. Basically more of the same. Things are happening and getting better. There is now a kind of a global brightness control that will work even when you're using HDR. And as I read through this, it seemed to me at first that they were getting rid of the SDR brightness knob, which I was very worried about, because you don't want your your individual windows with white backgrounds. You don't want them to be like looking into the sun if you have a really bright HDR monitor. No, you want to be able to turn that down. And yet at the same time, you want your HDR content to be able to go to 100%. So I actually got a hold of Xaver and asked. He said, no, that's not going away. This is just a multiplier to sit on top of that to be able to dim and brighten the entire screen. So they are doing this in a way that makes sense. So there will be an additional display brightness knob to get to. And then they're doing some more work on accurate colors, particularly if you do not have a colorimeter, which that is the fancy absolute color detector to be able to set your monitors up to be able to show the actual colors, like true colors. And one of the interesting things that they're doing here is if your display, so EDID, that is I forget what it stands for, but essentially that's the way that your monitor sends information up, like HDMI and DisplayPort, saying, hey, here's all the modes that I support. Well, one of the other things that can get baked into EDID is your color information. And so including like a ICC profile, which that is what you use to then manage colors to show, again, so that the color displayed on the screen is actually the right color. And so in Plasma 6.1, they are adding support to be able to take that, the color information from the EDID, and use that to do color parameters, to tune your colors to make them as accurate as possible. So that'll be cool. And then there's one more thing, and so this is quite down the same line as what Steam is doing, and this is in GameScope. And so a developer, Josh Ashton, has added a new backend in GameScope that actually uses Wayland directly, and it has direct support. This is pretty cool, actually. It has direct support for the Frog color management, which is what KDE is using to do HDR. And so you don't have to. First off, this means you don't have to go and install the hacky little extra layer to get your HDR working in KDE. It'll just work once you have a new enough version of GameScope, but then also you run it with this command GameScope, and you give it the width and the height, and then it's a -- HDR enabled. You also have to set it to full screen. But yeah, it's really pretty interesting that it is coming along, and we are getting even better with HDR stuff. So it makes me happy, because the big TV behind me, it has really good HDR, and so being able to do that with gaming is pretty cool. There's some other stuff going on, and there's also an update from Nate, the Pointed Stick blog. I will get a link to that as well. He talks about some of this stuff too, but it's all good. It's coming. It's getting there. Now we just need Chromium to get support for HDR on Linux. That is that's hopefully up next.
I mean Firefox?
Why would you want to use Chromium on Linux?
Well, see, the problem is that Firefox doesn't have HDR support anywhere. Chromium already has HDR support on Windows and on my mind has gone blank. That little OS that's for Chrome OS. That one. It works there.
Oh, okay.
Oh, and in the chat, Daniel Swartz, the EDID is Extended Display Information Data.
Identification data. Yes. Perfect. I could not think what EDID stood for. It's just one of those days.
That's why we're all here for you. We're all in this
appreciate
together.
it. Yeah.
Lots of love in this group and audience.
Was it? That was almost a Red Green reference. We're pulling for you. We're all in this together. Keep your stick on the ice. All right, David, what is Zed? What in the world is Zed?
Oh, have you not heard of Zed before?
I have not heard the Zed gospel. Feel free to try to proselytize us.
Okay, so if you remember, if you ever got the joy of experiencing it, there was an open source editor called Atom. It was released a while back, and it was really cool. I really liked it because it was extensible. It was a GUI, so it wasn't the same as using, an editor in your terminal, but it wasn't as heavy as a full IDE. So those times when you just need to make a quick edit or something, you could have decent, straight out of the box, you could have decent code recognition, their plugins and all this stuff. It was really cool. Well, Microsoft got their hands on it and killed it so that you would want to use their free VS Code instead. That's a brief synopsis. So that's basically what happened. It's a little more complicated than that. But the core team of developers that developed Atom created Zed. They used Z because it'll be the last editor you ever need, at least according to them. I'm not quite sure I'd go that far, but they started with Mac. The really interesting thing about their product, and I link to a blog post from them that came out this week called Zed Decoded Linux Win, because there's several interesting things about what they're doing. So first, they start off with a screenshot of Zed running on Linux. When it was originally released, it was released only on Mac. And a big part of that is because one of their goals is to make an extremely fast editor. They do not want you to wait on the editor for anything. So their target, it's written completely in Rust, and their target is to hit 120 FPS with the editor. Normally, you're talking about games when you're worried about frames per second. But in this case, they basically don't want you to have to wait from the time you hit a key to when something happens on the screen. That's their goal. They also want to make something that is open source and cross-platform. So because of their experience with Mac and Metal, they created their own shaders, their own renderer, a lot of effort into understanding Mac OS APIs to get to that 120 FPS number. It is also a fully native AppKit NS application, and I'm not a Mac guy, so I'm not exactly sure what that means. But they're creating a framework called GPUI, which is also released as open source, and it is a cross-platform framework for application development written in Rust. So as part of they're developing GPUI to support Zed, but then they're also releasing GPUI on its own. And as soon as Zed is complete, GPUI will be completely split out so that anyone that needs to do cross-platform development in Rust will be able to leverage all of this development that they've gone through. So it's a really interesting read. I commented, or I added the comment to this article, or why we can't have nice things. And that's because they go into some depth about the challenges they're running into with Linux and why it's taken so long to support Linux. And basically what it comes down to is fragmentation. Because their goal is speed, they cannot leverage a lot of the various abstraction layers that already exist. So you have to go and touch each various derivative of Linux, whether you're talking about Ubuntu, Debian, CentOS, Arch, Gentoo, and etc. They specifically mentioned those. But then you're dealing with no standards across distributions. They've avoided the whole packaging issue. But they referenced Tailscale, and they said just scrolling through Tailscale's package site tells us there's a lot of work to do that we never had to do for Mac OS. So they're kind of, I don't feel like they're negative about Linux, but I do feel like it is a really good example of some of the real world challenges of being native on Linux. It's not necessarily anything that we can fix because there are pros to being as fragmented. But it is interesting to look at it from an application developer that wants to write a high performant native application across all Linux operating systems. Some of the challenges you run into there.
Mm-hmm.
Flatpak.
Yeah. No, they went high performance.
Hey, in my benchmarks for the browser, Flatpak was faster than native, so twice.
Uh-huh. This is interesting. I need to dig into the problems that they found keeping things cross-platform and the fragmentation. I will say one of the things that will help them with fragmentation is after it's open sourced for a while and they start getting patches from the community and they get to the point to where they have developers working on it that run the different distros of Linux, that begins to take care of the fragmentation problem. Because you have somebody just working on each little tiny fork of it that keeps it up to date.
They actually call out a specific open source developer as creating the initial pull request that brought Z to Linux at all, because they open sourced it early this year. I think it was in January, and said less than 2 weeks after going open source, they had the pull request with the initial Linux support.
Yup. That's cool.
Yeah,
That's fun.
I think I remember. Yeah, I think I remember that story when it went open source. I can't remember if we mentioned it here or not, but I remember seeing it at least.
Yeah.
But so if you miss Atom, Z is coming.
I never used Atom, but I'll have to look into Z. It looks pretty interesting. Yeah, looks like fun. And as I said, I'm going to have to read through their blog post here in more detail because there's some juicy stuff in there. I like it. All right, let's see. Oh, yes, the Pi Connect. The Pi and Connect. Rob, give us the story. So Jeff Gerling covered this, and what did he say? The Raspberry Pi Sherlock Drill VNC. Did you see that?
Oh, no, I haven't.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll hand it to Rob, and then I'll come back and I'll tell you what that has to do with Sherlock.
All right. Because I have no idea what you're talking about. But so Raspberry Pi, what a wonderful system. Ken's main system that he uses for his desktop even. So as a command line junkie myself, I've always been just fine using SSH and the command line to remote into my Pis. So I didn't really realize there was a need for this feature, but I've heard it said in various social media platforms that remote desktop tools are not always compiled for ARM systems. So remoting into a Pi with many of the normal tools wasn't always an option, but you do have options, and some of those, some that are hard to configure, and others that now that Wayland's become a thing, they just aren't supported in Wayland. So as Gordon Hollingsworth from the Raspberry Pi explains, quote, "We want to be able to provide you with this functionality with our usual," another quote, "it just works," approach. And so they have created and released Raspberry Pi Connect, or RPI Connect for short, utilizing WebRTC technologies to remote in via a web browser and a peer-to-peer connection. Raspberry Pi Connect gives you free, simple, out-of-the-box access to your Raspberry Pi from anywhere in the world. It is a secure screen sharing solution for Raspberry Pi OS, and the requirements for Raspberry Pi Connect are: it requires a 64-bit distribution of Raspberry Pi OS Bookworm, and it requires the Wayland Display Manager. And of course, the network connection has to be there because it's not magic. So then, if you don't have this yet, I think it's going to come with Raspberry Pi OS. But if you don't have it yet, you can install it with a sudo apt install rpi-connect, and you can get that beta today. By default, it is a direct peer connection, but if for any reason it is not possible to establish a direct connection between your browsers and the Raspberry Pi device, RPI Connect and your browser may instead opt to securely relay traffic through their servers, encrypting it with DTLS. And right now, their current relay server is in the UK. So if you're far from there, you may have some lag if you're using that method of connecting. But a lot of it reminds me a lot of how Rustdesk uses it, being a local peer-to-peer with the option to relay through a server if you have to. Mm-hmm. But this is going to be just built into Raspberry Pi OS, so it should be easy.
Yeah. So
the term Sherlock.
The term Sherlock, it refers to an appliance of some sort. I forget what Sherlock actually did, but way back in the day. And Apple killed it by recreating its functionality and building it into Mac OS. And so the verb Sherlock, so Apple Sherlocked Sherlock. And so the Jeff Geerling video he's saying is Raspberry Pi OS doing the same thing to, in this case, Real VNC. They offered VNC and they offered also this from anywhere and you don't have to care about the details service for a few bucks a month. And here Raspberry Pi comes along and just makes it work automatically with, I think it's free. Isn't it free for Raspberry Pi users?
It is free. Yep.
Yeah.
For personal use.
Right. Yeah. Just like TeamViewer. No commercial use. No, of course not.
Though I've heard of people getting locked out because it detected that it wasn't for personal use, even though it was personal use.
I actually have a customer that was using TeamViewer in their business and got the letter that, hey, by the way, we see that you're using this for business stuff and you need to pay us now. Yeah,
it was a nice free option actually, at one point, but there's better ones today, I think.
Yeah. Speaking of options, I want to plug something real quick that is in the newest KDE, and I should have mentioned this last time, I forgot to. There is a new feature in KDE, I think it's in 6.1, remote desktop built right into KDE. So in KWin, you can, in system settings, you can go on and turn on and configure remote login based on the remote desktop protocol right inside of KDE 6.1. So similar thing. Now, this doesn't do any VPN. It doesn't do any port forwarding for you. You've got to take care of the actual connection part. But this is actually really pretty cool that this is built into KDE now.
Do you know what protocol? Is it their own?
Literally
protocol?
RDP. I think it's literally RDP.
It's pretty much how RDP is built into Windows now. KDE distros have RDP built in. Yeah,
which, that is a little scary at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, KDE looks like Windows. Now it has RDP like Windows. Oh, I think you KDE guys are just really, wanting to run Windows.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rob is a Windows guy. You should be ready to jump right into KDE.
Yeah.
All right, Jeff, where did we come from?
Well, that's what I labeled my story here. So I know we get new people who are part of the show, and I want to give a little history lesson of how Linux got its name when the inventor was named Linus Torvalds. And I'm sure you're thinking he just changed the S to an X and called it Linux, and that wouldn't be how it happened at all. To get to the bottom of this, we need to know a little bit about the OS that came before Linux to understand how we got where we are today. So numerous operating systems such as IRIX, Xenix, AIX, and HPUX are Unix-like systems that have X in their names, signifying their Unix lineage. Unix was developed in the late 60s by a Bell Labs team as a simpler alternative to the multi-CS project they were initially part of. The name Unix evolved from UNICS, which was Uniplexed Information and Computer Service, a joke by team member Brian Kerrigan. Before its commercial success, Unix was popular in academia, and Professor Andrew Tannenbaum created a mini Unix, Minix, the name of that, for educational purposes in '87. Linus Torvalds, a Finnish student at the time, encountered Minix in 1990 and decided to create his own Unix-like operating system because he thought there would be improvements, and he didn't like the Minix license, which would only allow Minix for educational purposes. This led to the famous email in a Minix news group in '91 from Linus asking about what they would like to see in a Minix lookalike. In his book, Just for Fun, The Story of an Accidental Revolutionary, Torvalds did say, "Privately, I called it Linux. Honestly, I didn't ever want to release it under that name, Linux, because it was too egotistical. What was the name I reserved for any eventual release? Freaks, Freax. In fact, some of the early make files, the files that describe how to compile the sources, include the word freaks for about half a year. But it didn't matter at that point. I didn't need a name for it because I wasn't releasing it to anybody." Ari Lemke, a teaching assistant at Helsinki University, connected with Torvalds after his initial Minix newsgroup email, and as an FTP server admin, Lemke created a directory for Torvalds' operating system, version 0.01, and named it /pub/os/Linux. We don't know how much Lemke liked the name Linux, but we do know he hated the name Freaks. That's why he didn't make the directory name Freaks. Basically, he took Linus's name, added the X because it was like Unix, and the rest is history. On September 17th, 1991, Torvalds uploaded Linux and announced its availability to the Minix newsgroup on October 5th, 1991. And to paraphrase Shakespeare, that which we call Linux would by any other name rock as hard and kick as much butt. and a side note, that was your poetry corner, because I have something else to talk about for the ending notes.
Fun. Yeah, this is the history. The history here is absolutely great. I will have to find it again and share it again. There is a wonderful video of some of the original fathers of Unix lounging back at Bell Labs, talking about how they've come up with this neat system where you can pipe commands in from one to the other. It's amazing, and it's where a lot of this started. It's incredible how much of what we take for granted and use runs all the way back to Brian Kernighan and Dennis Ritchie, and those guys that made C and made Unix. Just incredibly smart guys.
We stand on the shoulders of giants.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, and the whole ideology of it allowed such expansion over the years, and to be able to hold up because of the whole ideology of the foundation of the operating system.
Yeah. It is incredible how many things were developed in the 70s and 80s before these guys knew that anything would get as big as it is. How many of those things continue to work? Now, there's some of them that have had to be radically changed. Like in the beginning, when they first came up with IP addressing, everything was classed. So you had either A networks, B networks, or C networks. And the biggest network you had, I think, was the A network, and there was like over 1 million IP addresses. The smallest network was a C network, and that still had, I think, over 1,000, or was it 256 in a C? Maybe it was 256 in a C network.
Well, if it's the same as today, it's 250.
255, I guess. 255 or 256, yeah.
A couple aren't usable, but
yeah. Although the couple being unusable, that may be a CIDR innovation. But regardless,
no, it's broadcast and network.
Yep.
Well, yeah, I know, but I think that may have come along with CIDR, didn't it? Anyway, it didn't matter. So it's there was only like 1 million networks possible. And back in the day, it's like, oh goodness, there will never be that many computers on the internet. And then then things changed and the internet exploded. And then back in I think it was the 80s, they came up with CIDR, which was kind of a bolt-on where they said, okay, let's throw away this idea of A, B, and C networks, and we'll just have a net mask. And you can make your network whatever size you want to. And I don't remember, David, you may be right. The original spec may have had the one IP for network and one IP for broadcast. But that definitely is a part of the CIDR notation and the idea that you can make your networks whatever size you want to. But like so many of the other things, TCP, UDP, these are old technologies. They were invented and designed a long time ago, and we still use them. It's kind of amazing to see these specs that, yeah, a few things have changed, things have been bolted onto them, but they got it. They did such a good job with some of these designs on these back in the 70s and 80s. Incredible.
Well, TCP/IP, I believe, came out of the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
I will say, anybody who really liked the story, if you go to the link in the show notes, there's a lot more detail. I cut probably 50 to 70% out just for brevity.
I've added a link right below that. That is the YouTube video of the guys at Bell Labs talking about Unix. And I would actually recommend, if you want to spend about 30 minutes with this, start with the YouTube video, watch that, and then go read the article about Linux, because that gets the timeline going correctly.
So one question.
Yes.
About code stability. Since all of these really stable things originated in the 60s and 70s, was there any association with drug use and code stability that we should be considering now?
The Ballmer line, right?
I was going to add as well, part of the reason they never thought there were going to be that many computers, so people, maybe younger people, long time ago back then, when you got on a computer, you didn't have like personal computers as we know them. You would have a computer lab, and there it was like one major server, probably the size of a refrigerator or maybe a few refrigerators, and everybody would connect to them with dumb terminals. Mm-hmm. And so you had a ton of people accessing that machine at the same time. So you didn't have your own machine. You didn't have your own computer. You just sat down at a terminal and logged in. So universities didn't have a ton. Well, universities, governments, they didn't have a ton of machines. They just had big mainframes that were everybody would use.
Well, it's just like a NATed router. You have one public IP providing the whole business. I mean, you could have more, but
mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, you know, for our newer people that maybe don't realize how much, you know, computing was different back then. When I first started college, I was programming Fortran 77 on a Cyber 1000 mainframe on a dumb terminal.
You know, what's funny is how many times a computer technology has come along and people have looked at it and kind of scoffed and gone, oh, that's just a toy that'll never take off. And 10, 15, 20 years later, and that has taken over the market. Because there was the DEC DEC, the CDC, right? The was it the CDC 11? PDP, excuse me. DEC and the PDP computers. PDP-1, you know, it was extremely underpowered. It was hardly good for anything. And well, eventually, you know, they kept bringing them out. And then you had like the PDP-11. I think Unix was written on the PDP-11. A lot of work done at MIT among the original hackers were on PDP machines. And so, you know, this toy kind of took over. Well, and then you had the Intel 8080 and 8088. The first desktop computer was some kits based on the 8080, and then people started going with the 8088, and so you went from the mainframe computer down to the mini computer, and then the microcomputer. And the microcomputer people thought was a toy, and it was only good for making dumb terminals with. And here we are, all running on microcomputers. I've kind of wondered whether the future is SoC, and so we're eventually get away from microcomputers and motherboards and just everything in the future will be single board computers. I don't know, maybe. System on chips. I think AMD is kind of already there. They've already moved to system on chips for almost everything.
I mean, Ken's already there, so.
Yeah, it's true. That's true. I mean, we're kind of moving in on that point where most people don't need more power than you can get on a Raspberry Pi 5. But by the time we're up to like Raspberry Pi 7 or 8, it'll be caught up. It'll cost more, but it'll be caught up.
Well, it's kind of interesting if you take a long-term look. A lot of stuff that's old is new again. Because I mean, what about you got a Raspberry Pi and you're using like Google Docs and the spreadsheets and all that kind of stuff. You're kind of going back to a dumb terminal almost. I mean, you got local processing, but if you're offloading to a server in the cloud, you're kind of back there again. And we have, we had our chips, and then we added math coprocessors to speed things up, and then we brought those inside the chip. Well, now we're taking those, extra processors. Now they're AI processors. And
what is a
things.
GPU except a really big parallel math coprocessor, right?
Exactly. And now we put it in the CPU. So our CPUs are turning into systems on a chip because they keep, to get the speed and the interconnects, they put it on a piece of silicon and keep expanding the different chips going on there. So we're kind of going back there again, adding more of these co-processors.
Well, even more popular, the most popular dumb terminal today, and I mean they are dumb, is Chromebooks.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, at least that's how I started. Now you can install some Linux stuff locally, but the initial design, the basic purpose, and how probably most people are using it is it's just a dumb terminal in a web browser.
Yeah, although it's really not fair to equate everything that a web browser can do with what a dumb terminal did. It's just really not apples to apples.
It's a smarter dumb terminal. I mean, it is the future. It's not 1970s.
I mean, WebAssembly. You can do a lot in WebAssembly. ASM.js.
It's not a dumb terminal. It's a thin client.
There you go. That's
same
more accurate. Oh, goodness. Let's move on. David actually has our last story, and he is... It's all about somebody taking a dumb terminal and making it smarter.
Exactly. I have two links to two different stories about the same subject because I've got a 9to5 Linux story about Asahi Linux bringing Fedora 40 to Apple Silicon Macs with KDE Plasma 6. So now you get Wayland and all that Apple Silicon goodness. And I am a bit of an Apple snob. So I feel like Linux on Apple is the only way I might possibly run Apple hardware ever in the future. I do not like the Apple company. So, in fact, the only reason I have this story, I'm going to pick a bone, is because Rob stole my AI story. But I'm just, it's fun to be a little snarky. And speaking of snark, I also linked to the Register because they have a bit of a snarky take on the Fedora Remix 40. But a couple of points that they made that I thought was kind of interesting is they are evidently big Mac users. So they're like, well, why would I run Linux when Mac does everything I want to do, blah, blah, blah. But they do mention the fact that most of the desktop Linux software that you have to depend on to function well, Google Chrome, Slack, Dropbox, Zoom, Skype, any of those sorts of things. Although I don't know why they mentioned Skype. Does anybody still use Skype? But anyway, are not ARM64 software. It's all x86 only. So they say it's a surprisingly long list. So they're like, we can get ARM versions of all this stuff already on Mac. So we're not switching yet. But anyway, I like Asahi Linux. I like the performance that you get out of Apple hardware. My understanding is actually that Linus himself develops the kernel on a Mac running Asahi. At least he did for a while. I assume he still is. I haven't heard any different. But the development marches on. And now we've got Wayland and KDE 6 and everything. So what's to hold you back?
Yeah.
The price tag.
Well, yeah, the price tag is part of it. It's actually pretty fascinating. So now the flagship for Asahi, like if you go to the website, asahilinux.org, and you go to download, Fedora is where they send you. Asahi is now Fedora. And that's pretty cool. I think that's neat.
If somebody can find me a MacBook M1 for less than $300, I'll get in and install Asahi.
I mean, they'll eventually come down to that.
Eventually. That's what I'm waiting for.
You could get an M1 Mac Mini for that price point.
I don't want to be tethered to a desk for that. I am on a desktop now. I'm on a desktop for the show, but something like that I want to be able to bring around and use it a lot more than just...
I think the M series makes more sense for a laptop than it does a desktop.
My desktop's just fine. I don't need battery life and all that great stuff that M1 has.
Keith S. mentioned that the one issue he sees is that they're behind, like they don't have any M3 or M4 support. But a big part of that is because Apple does not help Asahi or Linux at all. Now,
correct.
They were keeping
what little
up pretty
credit
good.
we can give them, they aren't actively fighting it like they have in the past. They aren't breaking it, but they're not offering any help. So anything that happens has to be reverse engineered by the community and by the Asahi team.
Yeah, I haven't followed the Asahi as well as I was the first, couple of years, but I know when the M2s came out, they got that going pretty quick. So I guess I'm a little surprised to hear that they don't have the M3 support yet at all, with the M4s just here.
Probably depends on the instruction set. How different is it than?
Yeah, I think they said M2 wasn't very different, but that's all right. I just want an M1 because that's the one I'm going to be able to afford.
So, actually, it looks like Asahi will boot on the M3. There's just a long list of things that are TBA/whip. So, like, your GPU doesn't work yet. That's kind of important. But
it took them a while to get the GPU just on the M1s, and that was like one of the last big things they got.
Yes, and I think parts of that are still being worked on. But it's what's funny is you get better, like for example, OpenGL. You get way better OpenGL support on Asahi than you do running Mac OS on these, because for whatever reason Apple hates OpenGL. It's
because they didn't make it,
I guess.
Well, are they still using the metal interface on the?
That's what Apple's trying to push, yeah.
Because I know they haven't done much with the metal. I mean, as much as they said we're going to support gamers about 6-9 months ago, they kind of just said, well, here's a little bit of documentation, good luck, and figure it out.
I am sure that the people that make engines that Apple actually wants on their stuff sign NDAs and get more documentation.
They probably
Zed
do,
and
but
GPUI use metal.
Yeah, that's true. All
I think
right.
Most gamers and other things are not on Mac anymore. I think Linux's percentage is now higher than Mac for gaming.
Yeah,
so
has been since like last summer, I think.
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
So I don't think there's a lot of drive to probably develop heavily on Mac.
It's kind of one of those self-fulfilling prophecies.
Yeah.
All right, shall we get into some command line tips? We got some fun ones here.
Let's do it.
They're not all actually command line tips. They're just tips.
Yes.
Mine's a command line tip. Rob's appears to be a command line tip.
It is.
I'm not.
Jeff?
I'm
Jeff, what about
rebelling
David?
again.
Is David's a command line tip? Nope.
No.
We're 50%. We're batting 500. Oh well. We'll start with the cool kids, and then we'll get to those GUI apps after that.
Well,
Rob, what is your command line tip?
All right, so my tip here is it's Radeon by an app created by Christos Angelopoulos. And I have shared some of his work before. He does some pretty nice TWiT apps, it seems like. I did a game of his, I don't know, a month or two ago. So Radeon, I'm not going to have the audio on either because I don't know what's going to play. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to get this to get taken down because of it. So you're not going to hear it, but I'm going to show you. And let me make sure I put that on the screen here. I'm going to show you for those who are watching. So it is GitHub. You go there, you go to get the direction, read the directions to get the requirements, and then just there's an install script. You install it and run it. So to run it, it's just a radeon.sh. So I run that. And what this is, I guess I haven't said what this is. This is a online radio application. So you can listen to the radio, music, whatever. And there's all kinds of channels, stations built in, I guess, and you can add more to it. That's all in the documentation, how to add it. So there are also different settings. I'm showing you the default screen, but you can also use a fuzzy find, as long as you have that prerequisite installed, and you just go into preference and set that. So to get started here with my quick little demonstration. So I ran radeon.sh for those who are not watching and those who are watching. And then I got a list of stations. 0 is random. I got jazz or NRK jazz, jazz something else, jazz radio, lantern. You go down a ways, you get to pop on number 23, rap on 24, rock on 25. I'm going to listen to some rock. So if I hit 25 here, hit enter, and then it's going to list the rock stations that they have in there. So let's see. Number 48 is Flux FM. I don't know what that is, but let's listen to that. And then all of a sudden, if you heard my audio, I'd be streaming audio right now and listening to whatever great music is on Flux FM. Too bad I didn't get some sponsor money for whoever Flux FM is, but I have no idea who they are. But anyway, and I hit Q to back out of there, and you can see the menu options. A is to do all stations, E is to edit stations, P is for preferences, and it brings you to a text file where you actually edit these stuff, and D is to find stations, and Q is to quit. So that is Radeon. If you are a command line junkie like me, but you want to listen to the radio on your desktop or laptop or whatever it is, I guess, in your Linux install, Radeon's an easy one for you.
Cool. There is apparently a Python version of it too.
Yes, there is.
Radeon.
And let me postulate this. So if you have something in the shell and you're playing media, is it truly a command line or is it a basic GUI?
It is a GUI inside the command line. It's a TWiT is what they call those.
Yes.
TUI. Text user interface, as opposed to graphical.
Yes, I could run this without having a GUI at all. I could just be on a TTY. So it's.
And actually, one of the fun things that you could do with this is have a Raspberry Pi somewhere hooked up to your stereo system and SSH into it, run a screen or TMUX session, and use that to control your radio playing.
Yep, you make yourself a nice little radio out of a Raspberry Pi. Now I got a good project idea.
There you go. That's what you could do with all those Raspberry Pis hanging around. All right. So I've got one for you, and this is really a simple one. There's something in Bash that seems useless and is actually useful, and it's the null statement, and that is just a semicolon, or excuse me, a colon, just a colon by itself. Semicolon ends a command, but a colon by itself it's a null statement. It doesn't do anything, except it can eat input. So the place that I use this is I've got a script that runs and it checks something, and the particular when it makes this check, it runs another application, and it returns 0 if the thing works the way it's supposed to. But if it does not, so in this case it's looking for a dependency. If it doesn't find it, it actually returns an error. Well, the problem is that when you get an error returned inside of a script, it will oftentimes end the script. It's an error, so we got to bail out. And that's not usually what you want to happen in the middle of a script. And so there's this little bashism that you can use, and it's the double pipe, which in this case is an or, and then space, and then a colon. And so it's saying or null, which... So you have your command in there, and or null just means if you get an error returned from that, then just ignore it and go on. Super useful, and it'll keep your scripts from failing out when you don't want them to, when something doesn't go the way you expected it to. So not always useful, but boy, when you need it, you need it.
Neat.
Yeah, it's cool. All right, Jeff, tell us how we can get our DJ on.
Well, something not known by many is the large crossover the Linux community has with the live DJ crowd. I mean, who hasn't been to a, user group meeting and the speakers come out, the lights go, we've all been there. Well, okay, maybe not, but, if anyone takes this app and becomes really famous, I want to hear them shout out the Untitled Linux Show as where they got their start. So my tip this week is Mix, M-I-X-X-X. That's 3 X's. They have a new version out, but I wanted to call out not only the new version, but the fact there's a DJ app and it's on version 2.4.1. So what is it? Mix is an open source, free, and cross-platform DJ software for performing live mixes. The latest version, if you already use the program, fixes bugs and new hardware supported, and hardware such as a Denon DJ MC6000 MK2, which is a DJ mixer and controller. Ton more it supports, but that's just an example of when I say hardware, what it's supporting. Mix is a tool to work with DJ hardware to let you create unique live mixes with digital music files. They say it'll work if you have just a laptop and are new to DJing, or if you're an experienced turntablist. It features like beats per minute and musical key detection, so you know the next track from your library that'll best integrate with what you're currently playing. But you can also use sync lock to match the tempo and beats of up to 4 songs for seamless mixing. As mentioned, it has built-in mapping for DJ controller hardware and let you have a hands-on way to control mix. So basically you get on, like, say, that Denon. It's got a bunch of switches and various slides that you can use, and then use it to control what mix is doing. Of course, it allows you to add sound effects, change the effects you already have in your library. They haven't left out the vinyl crew either. You can use turntables with time-coded vinyl records to scratch your own digital music files. There are a ton of ways in this program to let your inner DJ out and start your new hobby or enhance your existing career. But just remember, you heard it here on the Untitled Linux Show. And if anyone wants to get creative and wants to link to a file to our Discord for us to hear a Linux-inspired track, I would love to hear it.
So you kind of were tongue in cheek there about the whole crossover between Linux and DJing. There is actually a pretty sizable crossover between Linux and music creation, because you've got things like, well, Ardor is out there. Ardor is fairly popular. There really is. There's quite a few artists, not like huge, but there's some artists and there's some recording studios that do actually run Linux shops. So it is out there. The crossover does exist.
And you also have the crossover of a lot of the hardware is running Linux kernels.
It's true
now.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Pretty much anything, if it's smart enough to run an OS, it's got Linux inside of it.
Pretty much anything artistic has some Linux there somewhere.
Yep. Or if it's not running Linux directly, it's got to be some sort of Unix. I had speaker management platform. Let's see, what was that? I can't remember the name of it at the moment. But it was smart enough to have Ethernet, and of course I had to figure out what was running inside of it, and come to find out it was BlackBerry's Unix, I think. But it, it had an open debug port that you could say, I want you to run this command under debug shell, and it would drop you into a shell from the outside. Wow. That was fun. Broke that a couple times and had to fix it because I was playing around with it.
Show titles: Speakers Become DDoS.
Yeah, not quite. But anyway,
show title. I fixed it because I broke it.
That's story of my life.
That's not a show title. That's just
life.
That's just us.
Yes. All right, David. Let's talk about PanWriter.
All right. So, I just found out about PanWriter today, actually, and it's pretty nifty. It is a Markdown editor that is cross-platform, Mac OS, Windows, and Linux. So, what is Markdown? First off, Markdown is a way of using simple ASCII standard, like hashtag, dashes, asterisks, to mark up text in such a way that you can still read it as plain text and understand it. But then if you've got something that can interpret your markdown, it actually has, like bold and titles and images in there and other things like that makes it beautiful, I guess. It could be a word you would use. But the reason why I like PanWriter is because there are times when you just want to have an application that does one thing and does it well. Markdown is something that is used for a lot of documentation in various programming languages. A lot of your documentation on like GitHub projects and stuff is in Markdown. So most editors have Markdown support already built into them, but there are times when maybe you just need to edit a document or edit a series of documents, you're writing some documentation, and you just want something that's simple and does one thing but does it well. And so I submit PanWriter to you.
Yeah, I suspect that most people have used Markdown and not even realized it, because it's actually, you can use it in a bunch of places.
Mm-hmm.
I think I think you can, even in Discord, you can do some Markdown and it works. If I remember correctly, that's what it is. Like the 3 ticks to insert a code block, I think is Markdown. And then of course it's what GitHub uses. So yeah, it's lots of places. Wikipedia too, right? Uses a form of Markdown? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All over the place.
Extended it. So Wiki's Markdown is much more enhanced. Does not appear to work in our StreamYard comments though.
Oh, bummer. I'll have to get on them about that. Yeah, Discord, Discourse, Doxygen. Doxygen is fun using it there. Microsoft Teams supports it, and StreamYard doesn't. Come on. Oh, fun. No, that's neat. I'll just take a look at PanWriter. That'd be fun. All right. That's our command line tips. What fun. Let's let each of the guys get a chance to get the last word if they want to. We'll start with Rob. Rob, I know you have at least a website for us to look at.
I do have a website. It's robertpcampbell.com. So from there, you can connect with me and you can find links to my LinkedIn, my Mastodon, and a place to donate a coffee. And last week I brought up on the show, I said 3 coffees equal a pizza. And thank you to someone who bought me 3 coffees to enjoy my pizza. So this week I have a new challenge. A new challenge for everybody. Ready for this one? 5,000 coffees equals an automobile.
Oh, good luck with that, man.
You'll make my day if I get 5,000 coffees. I just noticed the 3 coffees during the show here, but it's actually donated to me on Thursdays. So thank you, someone.
Awesome. David.
I've actually mentioned the last couple of times I've been on here, but no one has come knocking down the door yet. So if anybody hears this and either is located in Eastern North Carolina or knows someone who is and is interested in a web dev position, I've got a client that is looking for some programmers. We're about an hour outside Wilmington, headed back toward Raleigh. So I would say if you live within 2 hours of Wilmington and it's something you're interested in, reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn. And just like I've mentioned every other time, the reason why I do specify somebody local is because it is a mostly remote, but it is a hybrid position. They try to get everybody in face-to-face about once a month or so. So, I mean, I guess if you wanted to fly in for that, it might be an option, but I doubt they would be willing to pay for the flight. So, anyway, you can find me on LinkedIn. The easiest way to find me on there is to search for The David Factor. There are a lot of David Ruggles, more than I actually expected, but I am the only one that shows up if you search for all one word, The David Factor. And if you do connect with me, mention that you heard about this on ULS, because I get quite a few people that are headhunting the latest something or other, whatever the buzzwords of the day are, and I delete all those. So you mention ULS and I'll definitely connect.
Cool. All right. And Jeff.
Well, as I mentioned before, no Poetry Corner today, but I do have a Linux game suggestion. So we talk about gaming a lot, and I thought I would share this one because I'm having a lot of fun with it. It's Grim Dawn, GRIM space DAWN, and it's kind of a 3/4 Diablo-esque type game, like Diablo 3, maybe 4, and pretty story rich, kind of a RPG somewhat as well, and I'm just having a blast with it. So, you know, you build your character, you can customize them a lot of different ways, single class, multi-class, and then all sorts of trees. You can customize your character and whatnot. So, and it's one of those where you don't always trust everybody or whatever. There's some things that you can you can kind of change the world based on what you do. So, Grim Dawn, it's on Steam. I highly suggest it. So. Give it a shot and let me know if you like it. Other than that, I just want to wish everybody a happy Linux week, and I hope it's wonderful for everybody. And we'll see you next week.
Rob, what are you doing?
Are you Grim Dawn?
Are you gaming in the background?
I want to see what Grim Dawn was. That looks pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've actually been sinking time into Under RHEL, which is sort of that same vibe of the Diablo RPG, but this one is very post-apocalyptic. Kind of, it's like Metro, but not a first-person shooter.
Well,
and Metro,
talking about games, I'm in Fallout.
Yeah.
Which Fallout?
I'm playing through 3 now. I played through 4. Did that a couple of times and then kind of got out of it and then watched the Amazon show. I was like, oh, I need to get back into this universe. And now
I thought 3 and New Vegas are better than 4. I thought. I think there's a little more story, and the music I think is better. 3 and New Vegas have wonderful music.
Yeah. Rob, what are you playing these days?
I guess I'm kind of taking a little break from games, though, on any kind of hardcore games like that. But I guess if I'm going to plug a game on my cell phone, I've been playing a little bit of a game called Battle Cats. Nothing to do with Linux at all.
Battle Cats.
One of my kid plays it. I guess so. It is Linux. Okay. One of my kids plays the game, so I'm like, I'm gonna play that.
There you go.
It's just a simple little game where cats fight other animals, basically.
Fun. All right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, each of you, for being here. I want to say thanks to the audience as well. We appreciate everybody catching us live. Had a decent crew. And thank you to everyone on the download. We sure appreciate it. If you want to follow me and my stuff, you've of course got over at Hackaday. There is Floss Weekly on Wednesdays. There is the security column goes live every Friday morning. And boy, those two things keep me busy on Wednesdays and Thursdays. Whew, goodness. So we sure appreciate you going and checking it out. Maybe even drop a note in the comments that you came from ULS. That'd be fun. See if we can get a few people representing over there. That is pretty much it for us. Yes, it for us. That's it from us for this week. And we will see you next week on the Untitled Linux Show. Hey, did you enjoy the show but just want more? Or maybe you want to get in on the discussion, want to be able to talk on the Discord with the host and co-hosts, or just want to be able to support the TWiT network? Well, there is Club TWiT. It is a solution for you. It's basically a cup of coffee per month, and it goes directly to support TWiT, the network that you know and love. Take a look at Club TWiT. Thanks so much.